Even though the contours of the surrounding trees and branches could now be distinguished, he just couldn't make out the face of that black shadow, no matter what. It was like there was a cloud of demonic black mist swirling around that figure. The fan of the Windmaster was a first-rate spiritual device. It could blow away evil and bring order to the world. Having received the spell key from Shiqing Xuan, Xielin recited it in his mind and swept the fan. A whirlwind instantly blew up from the ground, whooshing and shaking the surrounding woods, and even a few small, weaker sprouts were pulled from their roots. It was a strength powerful to behold. Unfortunately, this wind was blown a little off course and didn't aim for the right target. Spiritual devices weren't that easy to manipulate. He wasn't the master to the Windmaster fan after all, and naturally he couldn't handle it as smoothly as Shiqing Xuan. The angle and amount of power were both difficult to control. It was either too strong or too weak, either off course or backwards. After realizing this, Xielin resolutely gave up and changed tactic. He snapped the fan shut and used it directly as an attacking weapon instead. He madly struck at the weak points of the other. Then, with a wish, he generated a sheen of spiritual aura on the edge of the fan and straight up turned it into a razor-sharp steel blade, slashing through the air, its shine chilling. Shiqing Xuan probably figured out what happened and cried in despair, "Your Highness, what's wrong with you? That's my spiritual device. I can't believe you're using it as a martial weapon. What a waste of God's gift." This was a problematic habit of all martial gods. Though he was otherwise occupied, Xielin spared a moment to say flatly, "It's all the same, makes no difference." Hua Chang's tone was becoming harsher. "Gege," he said. Xielin knew what he was pressing for, and as he fought, he rapidly swept his eyes around to look at his surroundings. There were mountains and rivers, towers and pavilions. Really nothing that stood out, and really nothing that could determine where he was. The Reverend of Empty Words noticed his movement and probably guessed his objective, as it suddenly said, "You're not Shiqing Xuan." Xielin never paused in his attack, but his mind processed rapidly. Usually, it shouldn't be this easy to figure out that the soul-shifting spell was used. So how did it immediately realize that I'm not Shiqing Xuan? Well, whatever. Keep going. The way he fought was insensible and insensitive. That Reverend of Empty Words seemed to not be able to take the beating anymore. It said, "You'll fall down this instant." Sure enough, it started to level curses at Xielin directly. However, it was like Xielin heard nothing, and he only pummeled harder. The Reverend of Empty Words then said, "You're going to be defeated in battle." Xielin laughed and said, "I was already defeated 800 years ago. A few more times means nothing to me. How much more can I be defeated? Just give up. Nothing you say to me will work." "Gege," Hua Chang called. "If you can't determine your location, just fan up a whirlwind into the sky with the Windmaster fan, and I'll know where you are." What a coincidence. Xielin had just thought of the same idea. "All right," he agreed. Just as he was about to raise his hand, suddenly, that Reverend of Empty Words let out a creepy chuckle. "Someone's coming?" it asked. Xielin became alarmed for some reason. Sure enough, that creature said in a low voice, "Don't worry, with your eyes wide open, you will watch the person coming to seek you die before you." Hearing this, Xielin couldn't laugh anymore. His heart dropped violently, and even his breathing stopped in that moment. The next second, he actually yelled out loud, "Shut up!" In a flash, More than 50 kicks landed on that Reverend of empty words, each bashing right on its head. It could barely speak from the attack, yet it sighed deeply. This was a sigh of satisfaction, like it had tasted some sacred delicacy, and it laughed coldly. Accidentally dropping his guard, Shilin actually let it suck what it wanted from him. However, Shilin hadn't the mind to notice, because those words truly did make his heart feel like it had been struck violently. Even if he knew that Hua Chang wouldn't die before him so easily as that creature had said, and to be honest, Hua Chang was already dead, still a deep, uncontrollable panic manifested. He didn't realize that he couldn't even stand to hear the very idea. Although those in the communication array didn't notice anything amiss, it was like Hua Chang was telepathic. He became alarmed and said, "Gurgur, is it saying something to you?" Shilin replied, "It's saying nonsense." "No, it said nothing." Hua Chang immediately understood and cursed. "It's seeking its own death. Tell me right now, and I'll come straight over." Shilin hastily said, "No need. Don't come over. Absolutely do not come over." "Sorry to interrupt," Shichingshan spoke up. "I say, the two of you really did secretly exchange verbal passwords, right? Your Highness, did you not notice? You got the wrong array. The wrong array." It was only then that Shilin discovered, ever since he used the soul-shifting spell, while every word Hua Chang said to him was passed through their private communication array. Because he was focused on fighting, with his heart a mess on top of that, he'd responded directly in the main spiritual communication array without realizing. Now, the fact that they had connected in private communication was utterly exposed. However, there was no time to be embarrassed. Shilin said, "It's nothing. Give me half an instant's time. I can take care of this thing." After that, he plugged his ears anew, and his attacks became even more vicious, focusing only on dealing with the Reverend of empty words. However, he had no idea that back in the town of Fugu, after Hua Chang heard his words, he raised his hand and smacked, bashing Ming Yi 3 feet into the ground. Then he immediately turned to Shichingshan, who had taken over Shilin's body. "Switch back," he said. Shichingshan had already planned on changing back immediately, but seeing that sight, he hurriedly said, "Crimson Rain, Sword Flower, what are you doing? I'll switch back right now. His Highness is helping me, so it makes more sense if he hit me. Why did you hit Ming Xiong?" But the moment the words left his lips, he realized that he was currently in Shilin's body. So of course, Hua Chang wouldn't hit him. If he must hit someone, then it could only be Ming Yi. On the other side, Shilin was immersed in the fight, but he suddenly heard Shichingshan yelling in the communication array, Your Highness, can you please plug my ears and run further away? I'm switching back." "Lord Windmaster, will you be all right?" Shilin asked. "I can't fight it, but I can still run away," Shichingshan replied. Thus, Shilin gave that Reverend of empty words one final kick, making it fly a few miles away. He turned around to flee wildly, but then he stopped. "Wait, you don't need to run away," he said. "Let me set up a protection array for you. Lord Windmaster, do you have any protective spiritual devices on you? If you don't, precious gems and treasures can do it too." Hearing him, Shichingshan hastily replied, "Treasure? I've got that. Feel around my neck. There's a longevity locket. Will that do?" Shilin felt around, and sure enough, Shichingshan was wearing a long, golden longevity locket, its sheen exquisite and opulent. Shilin said, delighted, "Yes, this is a rare treasure. Excellent." "Really?" Shichingshan asked. "I've got more. There's a jade belt around my waist, an agate ring on my finger, some pearls on my boots. The sandalwood handle of the whisk is older than you. Oh, and apparently The hairs of the whisk are also rare, plucked from some spiritual beast. In one breath, he said 7 or 8 items, then continued. In any case, Your Highness, just take a look and see if everything on me can be used. Yes, they could all be used, and they were all extremely rare treasures. Shelian was shocked, as expected, of the god of wealth, as expected of the younger brother of the water master. He said, they can all be used. I'll find a house nearby and set up an array. When you're switched back, keep the earplugs in and don't look outside. Stay in the house and don't go out. Wait until we come. Shichingshuan was going to break down in sobs. Your Highness, he said, you're too reliable. Thank you. From today onwards, you're my second best friend. From now on, this Windmaster will never forget you in any good endeavors. Shelian didn't know whether to laugh or cry and responded politely. Thank you. During their exchange, the Reverend of Empty Words was left far behind. Glancing around, Shelian found a small pavilion nearby and charged in, shutting and locking all the doors and windows with a wave of his hand. He then wrapped the golden longevity locket around the door latch, bit blood from his finger to draw a spell. Then he laid out all the treasures in formation, drawing a blood array. All of these actions were done in a short amount of time, and finally he sat in the center of the room, closing his eyes. He said, 1, 2, 3, soul-shifting spell, return. It was like he was violently thrown high into the sky again, then plunged. After a wave of whirling, Shelian once again felt his feet touch the ground. Unsteady, he was going to fall over. Before he did, a pair of hands caught and supported him. He opened his eyes and heard Hua Chang's voice from above, dark and grave. Gogo, I think you'd better explain yourself. Shelian grabbed his arm and steadied himself. He was just about to speak when suddenly he realized that someone was missing and said, Where's Lord Earthmaster? Who knows? Hua Chang said. Shelian was taken aback. Who knows? He asked. Then he looked to the side. There was a human-shaped crater on the ground, and Ming Yi was slowly crawling out of that hole. He stopped talking, speechless for the moment. In the communication array, Shichingshuan's voice came. Eh? He asked. Shelian tensed and asked, Did it come? Having used so many of Shichingshuan's treasures to form the array, he made sure that the defense of that house was indestructible. And the Reverend of Empty Words shouldn't be able to intrude. Even if it was powerful, it would still take time. However, Shichingshuan said, No, Your Highness, this array is impressive, steady like the mountains. It really does feel secure. I think nothing could break in the next 3 days and 3 nights. It's just, I can't believe it's this place. What place? Do you recognize it? Shelian asked. Of course I recognize it, Shichingshuan replied. This is the terrace of Cascading Wine. It's where I ascended. Shelian was taken aback, thinking, the terrace of Cascading Wine? Shichingshuan seemed to have made a round of the room and firmly said again, That's right. I come back to this place every few decades to check up on it. I'm not mistaken. No wonder the Reverend of Empty Words knew immediately that the one in the shell wasn't the real Shichingshuan. If it was the man himself, by just one look, he would have known that it was the terrace of Cascading Wine, and there wouldn't be any need to look around to make sure. Ever since Ming Yi had crawled out of the hole, he squatted down on the ground to start drawing an array. After a few strokes were drawn, however, he suddenly raised his hand and blasted away the array entirely. Hua Chang's eyes immediately grew cold, and Shelian was also taken aback. He asked, Lord Earthmaster, what are you doing? Ming Yi rose to his feet and said, The distance shortening array doesn't work anymore. We have to walk over. What do you mean, it doesn't work anymore? Shelian exclaimed. It means just now, someone or something destroyed all the connection points of the distance shortening array near the terrace of cascading wine. No, the entire area's connection points have been destroyed. Not long ago, Shichingshan was clearly brought over to the terrace of cascading wine via the distance shortening array. It seemed that as soon as Shichingshan hid himself inside the pavilion, the Reverend of Empty Words immediately reacted and tampered with the points, intentionally slowing them down. This was no different than having the paths destroyed when crossing a mountain. Now, no one could even dream of using the distance shortening array to get close to the terrace of cascading wine. If we leave now, how long will it take before we get there? Shilin asked. Mingyi had already turned around and started walking. An hour, he replied. Shilin called out in the communication array. Lord Windmaster, we're heading over to where you are right now. You just wait until we get there. If anything knocks, absolutely do not open the door. All right, of course, Shichingshan said. Even if you didn't say anything, I already know. Don't take me for a 3-year-old who will open the door to anybody. Now then, my lords, please hurry, okay? Fortunately, the town of Fugu and the terrace of cascading wine weren't on separate ends of the earth. They were within acceptable distance of each other. If they hurried over now, they should still make it in time. The three immediately took off. On the way, Shilin casually tested his powers and discovered that the soul-shifting spell really did burn him out quite aggressively. That powerful wave that Hua Chang had poured into him was already used up by more than half. Hua Chang noticed his movements and asked, Goge, do you need more? Shilin hastily shook his head. No, he said. Really, thank you, Sun Lang, ever so much for being so generous earlier. You're welcome, Hua Chang said. I already said you can take as much as you want. After a pause, he then added, half jokingly, but when Goge pays me back, can I collect some interest? Shilin cleared his throat softly, thinking that it was probably an issue whether he could pay anything back at all. But of course, his lips were still bold. Yeah, sure, he said. Although it was estimated to be an hour, the three of them weren't mortals, and it was a dire situation, so naturally they were going faster. When they arrived at the terrace of cascading wine, Shilin took a look around, and sure enough, it was the same place as before. All around was a chaotic mess created by the misuse of the Wind Master Fan. The fan had refused his control and blew over trees and bushes, and Shilin was feeling a little embarrassed. Your Highness, in which building did you set up the spiritual array? Mingyi asked. Do you remember? Of course, Shilin remembered, and he was also searching for it attentively. Soon, his eyes lit up, and he pointed his finger. It's that small pavilion, he said. The three walked toward the small pavilion. The closer they got, the more relaxed they became, as if they saw a ray of hope. However, when they approached, Shilin's pupils instantly shrank. The doors to that small pavilion were open, creaking eerily as they swung back and forth in the chilling night air.